All right, so I'm going to talk about the TIC survey results. This is year 9 of our annual Business Technology Survey that's distributed by the Findlay Hancock Alliance. And I will see. In 2012, we had a number of responses, but this actually shows you the data from the past 9 years. So we've got, in the first year that we had surveys returned, we had a lot of them, 237. Over time, that number has decreased, but we're actually on the uptick again, so we're hopeful that we will continue to have feedback from the community. One of the things that we'll see in a few slides is that they are now starting to do national studies that focus more on small businesses. As was mentioned in the earlier presentations, a lot of those early surveys were for companies that had 1,000 employees. And when you're trying to translate that to what students in our program are going to face, they may not be going to work for that company that has 1,000 employees where they have specialized security people working in their IT department. So we wanted to make sure that we could give our students a better sense of what was going on. So in discussion with the TIC and the information assurance faculty here at the university, this series of questions was developed, and we've modified it over time, and we've seen some trends in the area, and we'll be able to compare them now to some of those surveys. If you look at the charts here, most of our businesses are small businesses. 100 or less is what we've considered small businesses, and 70% or more, some years it's been as high as 80% of our respondents have been from businesses that have 100 employees or less. So those stacked layers there show you the relative sizes of the companies. Those big red bars at the bottom are the companies that just have 1 to 5 employees, and you can see that's actually a fairly sizable chunk of our population. About 20% of our companies are very small. So again, that just sort of sets the stage for what kinds of responses we expect and anticipate compared to larger companies. So in 2003, they started, the TIC started thinking about a way to assess the level of knowledge and awareness of security issues and how much our businesses actually were depending on technology at that point in time. 2003 was quite a while ago, and a lot of the technologies that we appreciate and expect today weren't in existence at that point, or were just coming into the place where they were being used, and so certainly not always in those small companies. So the steering committee came up with a survey based on some input from Lauren Wagner and some students that he had working in the program at that point, and modeled on some of those national surveys that were being done at the big companies. They scaled it down to fit the smaller business community. The Chamber of Commerce of the Alliance, they handled distributing it, and then the University of Findlay said, we'll provide the students and the people to go ahead and process the results each year. But we don't block any responses that come from non-chamber members, and that's one of the questions that we actually ask. Are you a chamber member? And usually about 75 to 80% of our responses come from members of the chamber, but not always. As I say, we get some others as well. This is the history of the survey responses that we've gotten in our 9 years. You can see that we had 237 at the very beginning. In that first year, we got a lot of good response. Most of those were in paper form. 180 of them came in paper form, and 57 were completed online. So we had a large task for our students to do some data entry to get those responses in so that we could treat them all in the same way in one online system. Over time, the number of paper responses has dwindled, and if we look at this, it sort of gives you a better visual there. The light blue bars are the paper responses, and you can see they were the taller bars by far in the early years, but it's gotten a little bit closer now in the recent times, and there was actually one point this summer where, in the late spring as the responses were coming in, where the number of paper and the number of online responses was actually equal. So we were very happy to see that shift, and we anticipate that maybe in the future more or maybe all of them will come in an online format. But in the meantime, we still value that input. We get companies that say right across the top of their form, I don't have the internet at work, but they still take the time to respond to our survey, and so we value their sense of what technology is doing for them, even though they're not at that level where they're even using the internet in their businesses on a daily basis. So we do have an interesting mix. So the way that the responses are distributed, the Chamber of Commerce has members, and they have a main contact at each business. So in 2012, there were 575 main contacts in the chamber list. So they mailed a paper copy of the survey to all of the main contacts. They gave them a cover letter that had a link to the online survey. So just because they got a paper survey didn't mean they would have to do it in paper format. They could do it online. But we only send one paper copy per company. The paper copies then get returned to the University of Findlay. We have a secure mailbox set up where those come back, and then we process them in the fall when the students come back. The online form of the survey, we send a link to all contacts at the chamber. So they had 2,500 email contacts in their list in spring of 2012. So this went out to all of them. They also put reminders in the e-briefings that get sent out. And so people have that opportunity, that reminder to go out and fill it. We don't have any way to track whether more than one person at a company returns a survey. We suspect that probably not too many of them do. When you've got a small company that has maybe 10 employees, chances are pretty good that somebody knows that the other person has done it, so you're not necessarily going to get many of them, but it is possible that there could be more than one response from a company. Our online survey tool then takes and produces simple reports so we can kind of see some bar graphs of what was returned, but it will also export the data to CSV files for us to use in Excel or to SPSS file formats. What our students do with the survey is that they are expected to treat the data confidentially and to protect it. And that's one of the things that we talk about a lot. You know, information assurance is all about protecting the integrity of your data. So we say that, well, we want to make sure that it does stay confidential. Companies are filling out these surveys. They don't want people talking about what they do and what they don't have, specifically naming companies. And it's a pretty anonymous survey. It would be hard to tell, but in a small community, there's only so many businesses that are in a particular, healthcare field or in a particular that are of a certain size. So we do have to be careful about how much we reveal and how we reveal our statistics. We also have to make sure that the students think about that accuracy, because if we're putting in these responses and they're not accurate, then we would have issues with our reporting as well. So those are the things that our students have to be very conscious of as they're working with the survey. In the beginning, we started out with 3 big categories that we thought were important. We wanted to kind of know what infrastructure did they have, hardware, software, what were they running, was their network wired or wireless. We wanted to know about the business impact, how much of an impact did it have on their business, were they using the technology, did they feel it was effective, and then security questions, because in the information assurance program we really are interested in knowing what are they doing to secure their networks, how aware are they of security issues. So in years 1 through 4, we just went with those 3 categories. We had probably about 45 questions. Then came the flood. And if you were around in Findlay during the time of the big floods, that was certainly a big impact on the community. So we added some questions that dealt with disaster recovery and business continuity and some of those kinds of things. And those questions have continued to evolve over time. We've kept some of them, but not all. But we added at least 15 questions that dealt specifically with the flood. Did you have any impact? Were you able to get your data back? Did you lose things? Did you change your policies because of it? In year 6, we said, what was kind of nice having this theme, and that's when the theme idea evolved. So in year 6, to our questions, we added social media and networking questions. We gave the survey out in the spring, and then by that fall, when we did our forum, we had speakers that addressed those topics specifically that could relate to it. Year 7, we added questions on mobility, because that was becoming a big topic at that point. Year 8, we had virtualization and cloud computing, so that was our forum last year, and this year we have bring your own device, and so we've got a few questions that dealt with that. Year 10, we'll be sitting down at the end of this year, coming into January, and we'll be talking about what are we going to look at next year. So we actually start planning the theme almost a year in advance, trying to figure out what's going to be that next topic that's important to the businesses. So our results, we look for trends over time, what's happening, what's changed. A lot of things sort of stay the same in the survey from one year to the next. Some of the things kind of creep up. We see certain things being introduced and being used more and more. Other things sort of die out. We modify our questions a little bit to deal with that. We do some relationships between the questions, looking at things like, how much security is there compared to the company size and those sorts of things. And we compare them to other studies, and that will be what I'll focus on in this one. So what do our companies look like, the ones who answer our surveys? About 95% of the companies that responded this year use Windows as an operating system. It may not be the only one, but it was certainly used by most of the companies that responded. Some had also an additional 1 or 2 as well. 85% of the companies used Microsoft Office as a productivity tool, so Word and all of those good things. 72% used database and analytical systems to report and query, so about 3/4 of our population are using some sort of a database. 42% use EDI or some other electronic business-to-business system. And 32% have some sort of an ERP system that may or may not be tied in with their accounting system. So those are kind of the big things that are sort of common threads between our companies. And certainly the 32% are among those larger companies that we have. As far as hardware, what's actually in the businesses, most of those red bars at the bottom, that's companies that have 1 employee per PC. So you can see that about 50 to 60% of our companies have a computer for every person. When you think of, and this was something that was hard for our students to get used to, well, why would a company have 10 employees to 1 computer? Well, if you've got a factory environment, certainly that's going to be the norm there. So you can see that we don't have as many organizations that are responding to this survey that are dealing with few people working with the computers and more people doing other things. In most of our, or at least half of ours, there's a fair amount of computer availability and use. And the green bars are 3 employees per PC. Other questions related to their infrastructure in terms of backup methods, and this will come up in some of the later reports. Less than 15% of our companies reported that they have no electronic backup system. So most of them are doing some sort of an electronic backup, and paper was one of the choices. So that paper is part of that 15%. So that has something that has over time increased. 42% of our respondents reported more than 1 regular method that they use to back up their information. So that, again, has increased over time, and we're pretty happy with that. And you can see that large blue bar there, that's our people backing up to disks or hard drives, CDs, DVDs, that's that next bar below, and then the bottom one is tape. So those are pretty much the most commonly used backup forms that we're using at this point. Another question that's come up in the past 2 years, and this is just a 2-year question, is tablet adoption. How many people are using those iPads and other tablets in their businesses? And it's kind of interesting to see that in the 4 bars there, because there were 4 possible things they could do. They could say yes, and the first year we gave them yes with a couple of choices, and then the second year we just said, just tell us yes, you are or are not. Tell us you're still evaluating, or tell us no, you're not. And then they could have skipped the question. So those were our 4 choices. And the thing to me that was really interesting to see is that pretty much stayed the same on the people who said, nope, we're not using them. Pretty much stayed the same on, nope, I'm going to skip this question. Still evaluating, that's pretty similar. But there are so many more that are saying yes now. And that difference in numbers pretty much corresponds to the difference in the size of the group that we had responding, because we had more responses this year. So people who didn't have the tablets in place maybe before are now maybe saying, yes, we are going to have tablets in place. And that will come up with this BYOD thing, because if you've approved tablets, maybe that's your way of saying, no, I don't want you to bring your own. I'm going to put tablets into place. Or maybe you've approved tablets that people are bringing in themselves, and you're going to put policies in. So the BYOD questions that we asked, we had 2 of them, specifically asked, can you use your personal devices at work or on your company networks, maybe from a remote spot, maybe from home, but can you use your own personal devices? And almost half said, yes, they can use their personal devices on the company network. 45% said yes, 48% said no, 5% weren't really sure whether or not they could, and 2% skipped the question. You usually have those people that do. But of those companies that said, yes, we are allowed to use our own devices, only less than half of them said that they could, that there were policies regarding that. So 41% said that the company had a policy about whether or not they could do it, how they had to do it securely, and so on. If you are leaving because you need to get to class, that's perfectly acceptable. We understand that. Attendance tickets will be available at the door, and I mention that because I know there are students and I see them looking anxious. So I hope you enjoyed this session. There'll be more information if you want to know it. It will be on the Alliance website. Mobile devices are becoming increasingly important. 81% think mobile devices are of increasing importance, but only 53% are concerned about security more because of those mobile devices. So that security is not coming along with the, hey, yeah, we think that's really important to have those devices, but we're not so sure whether or not it really matters. And when we look at that in percentages, it really sort of accentuates it when you see by the percentages rather than just the sheer numbers that maybe we need to get more people saying yes, that red on the right is no, I'm not more concerned about security even though we've got all these mobile devices. Other trends in our survey respondents for 2012, 37% think their security needs in the future are going to stay the same. 45% think it's going to increase moderately. 17% think it's going to increase greatly. So most of them recognize that security needs will increase greatly, and that will show up in the other surveys. 79% think it's worth spending money to fight spam and other malware. And again, that's one of those percentages that has sort of crept up gently over the 9 years that we've been doing the survey. So maybe from about 50% to about 80%. So that's kind of a nice increase. 20% have reported that they have no security or privacy policies at all, but, and this was a choose all that apply kind of a question, 59% said they have an acceptable use policy, 51% had a password policy, 50% had privacy policies, 45% email policies, third had social media policies, and a little more than a quarter had a disaster recovery policy. So policies are something that are evolving, and companies have more than one, even in some of these small businesses. So what was I comparing this to, and why did I think those particular statistics were important? It was very nice. This is National Cybersecurity Awareness Month. So the National Cybersecurity Alliance has just posted 2 new reports that really were very timely. The online safety survey was a survey of 1,000 adults, and it was done over 4 days at the end of August. The National Small Business Study was a study of businesses that had 250 employees or fewer, and it was done during a 3-day window in September, at the end of September. So very, very current statistics, and it really just fell in very nicely with the things we were looking at. It made me realize the TIC is so forward-thinking because the questions they started developing 9 years ago are the questions that are being asked at the national level now of small businesses. Now, note, they're saying small businesses have 250 people maybe, and we certainly don't consider that a small business in Findlay, but we're going to probably adjust our quantities so we can track and see where that 250 falls, because that falls in the middle of we lumped everything from 100 to 500 employees into one big category. We'll probably split that out in the future. So very similar questions. Sometimes, though, we were comparing apples to oranges, so a little bit different. In the NCSA Symantec study, they asked how many of your employees use the internet at work, and they reported that 87% of the companies had at least one employee using the internet daily. Our question just asks how many of you have employees using the internet at work without indicating daily, and we have 99% have at least one employee who's using the internet at work on a regular basis. So whether or not that's daily, don't know, but very much so our businesses, other than that one that says I don't have the internet at work, we really are on top of that here in this community. Another question that was asked on the NCSA study was loss of access. If you lost the use of the internet, our question asks if you lost the use of your company computers. So again, slightly different framework because of our population, but they had 38% that said it would be extremely disruptive if they lost access to the internet. And you can see the percentages on down to, and they did theirs on a scale. 5 was extremely disruptive, 18% was not at all, and they sort of left the middle categories unnamed. On ours, we have specific terms: disastrous, severe, moderate, minimal, and none. You can see that only 10% of our respondents think that it would not be at least some sort of a problem to lose access to their company computers, okay? So you've got 28% in the national study talking about the internet. We were talking about just company computers, but just 10% of our people felt that they could go on without their computers. So again, our people are relying on that information. Do you have a website if you have a website, is it used for selling and marketing directly to your clients, was another question, and we've been asking that one for some time. Took us a while to get it ordered right, but 46% of our respondents say yes, they have a website and they use it for selling and marketing. 38% of the respondents in that national study are using it for selling and marketing. So it's kind of interesting to see that even though they have companies that could be up to 250 employees, they may not all be using it in that way. And then this was a question that, again, sort of apples to oranges, a little bit had to be inferred. They did a 2-page summary of the 18 pages of questions, and the way they worded the question, at first I thought it matched up very closely to ours, but they said, who's responsible for online and cybersecurity in your company? And 66% of their respondents said it was the owner of the business. And 11% of them said, no one's really responsible for it, it's just out there. In our questions, we ask a question about, is the owner or CEO very involved in the technology decision making, and 93% of our respondents say yes. So not exactly asking the same thing as is it solely responsible, but is that head person very involved? And yes, in our case, and that's something that's been very high on ours all through the years, and we've always been very surprised by that. But maybe that's because we have a self-selected population that chooses to fill out the survey, and those are the people that care. Only 7% of our respondents have no structured support when we ask a question about how do you support things. Do you have internal or external support? Do you have certified people and that sort of thing? And only 7% say they have no support in our businesses. Policies and procedures was a really nice area to compare. I showed you that set of numbers earlier, what kinds of policies we have. Well, they asked about internet security policies. I'm not exactly sure what that means, but did that cover all or some of our questions? But 87% of the businesses had no formal policies at all, and 69% said they didn't even have an informal policy in place that was sort of a rules of use. In our survey, only 20% said they had no security or privacy policies. All of them had something. Now again, maybe that's because the people who don't have policies aren't choosing to answer the survey, but that's kind of where we stacked up. So I thought we looked much, much better on this. And again, maybe it's issues like the forum that bring up issues. Maybe this is the place where people learn about these things and say, yeah, I do want to do something different. Or on the Alliance website, some of those resources that are made available. So you can see kind of the differences there. They asked specifically about privacy policies. 38% of their respondents had them. We had 50% that had them. And then they didn't ask specifically about the others, but those are the other policies that we had. So I felt very good about that. I think we have a very forward-thinking community. How safe or secure is your company? And these two questions were almost word for word the same. The NCSA study asked about how safe do you feel your company is? We asked how secure do you feel your company is? And you can see the percentages. We have 96% of our companies feel that their company is somewhat or very secure, and it's a lower percentage in the national study. And again, I think outreach and awareness, maybe we have made a difference. Contingency plans, do you have plans for a disaster? They specifically asked about a data breach. We do not ask about a data breach. We just ask, do you have plans for disaster recovery or a business continuity plan? And you can see half of our people say yes, and another 20% or so say they're in progress on that. Other questions that we had that sort of address some of those questions include how long would it take you to restore your data if it was corrupted or destroyed? And at least half of our people think they could get it back within 24 hours, and that goes back to that backup policy and some of those procedures. Are you satisfied with your online safety posture? And remember, we asked them how safe did they feel they were, and now are you satisfied with that? 86% of the national respondents said yes, 96% of our respondents said that they were somewhat or very secure, so satisfied with that. So what do the individuals actually do? I said there were two studies from the National Cybersecurity Awareness Month website. One of them was about individuals. Why do I care about individuals? Well, if you're going to bring your own device, what you're doing with that device as an individual makes a difference. So this was how many people store business contacts, business records, or business documents on their devices, their personal devices. The numbers are relatively low, but from the trends that we've seen, things tend to creep up over time. My question is, does the employer know that they're storing these documents on their personal devices? Because that was not addressed. Another question that was asked is, which of the following things have you done within the past 6 months with a smartphone? Accessed work email, accessed work documents or databases on a server. This is from your phone, not even your iPad or anything. This specifically said smartphone. Social networking, online gaming, installed security software or applications. And it's only 31% that have put any kind of security software or applications on. And most people, when I say that, they say, oh, is there stuff out there for my phone? I didn't know that. But they're doing their social networking, they're doing their online gaming from that phone, so maybe introducing some risks there. Again, do the employers know that this is what's going on? What do the companies allow? This is what the individuals reported. They are allowed to use a personal tablet, smartphone, or laptop to perform job functions. And you can see about half of them there can or cannot. They can use a personal tablet, smartphone, or laptop to connect to a work network. More no's on that. Can't connect to. Maybe they can use that device to perform job functions, but they can't necessarily connect to the network. And the company has policies, training and security requirements. And again, a lot of them do not have anything in place to sort of address what should people be doing. So this was a chart that I thought about putting on the tables for everybody to look at and ponder over time. The question was, please choose which age range you think is most appropriate for a child to first own a tablet, a smartphone, a desktop, a laptop, an email account, or what have you. And my response to this, because I'm looking and I'm thinking, okay, 10 to 13 years old, more than half of the people think that their kids should have this by this age. If I think my 10-year-old should have an email account, am I going to give them my device to check their email? You know, we're traveling and they need to check their email and keep in contact. They need to do that social networking. Should I be giving them my device to do that? And is that my device that I use on the company network? Or is that my company device that I use on the company network? And does my employer know? So this is the sources. This also will be on the Alliance website. They were really interesting studies. National Cybersecurity Awareness Month, very timely. And there was also a SANS study that dealt with mobility and some more BYOD questions, but dealt with much larger companies, but a lot of the same themes there. They don't have it figured out yet either in the big companies. So, any questions? And I do thank my student, Mohammed Al-Jababi. He helped with some of that data entry that I said students have to help with. So he helped me with this year's work since we didn't have classes doing it. Questions? Okay, thank you very much. I'll have Lynn Child come on up next to give us a TIC update.